The train screeched into Stillwater just as the frost was lifting from the iron rails. Smoke bled into the pale sky, curling in slow spirals above the platform's warped boards. Not a soul waited there, save for a dog too old to bark and a man in a long coat with a badge dulled by years and wind. Sheriff Thom Ellard stood with his thumbs hooked through his belt, not looking for anyone, not expecting much, just marking another morning with his quiet kind of presence. Then she stepped down from the third rail car. Her boots were missing. Her dress, if it could be called that any more, was a once white garment, streaked with dust and train soot, cinched in with the fraying belt of a man's coat 3 sizes too large. One sleeve hung loose, revealing a bruise not yet turned. Yellow, she carried nothing. Her braid had come undone on one side, falling like a question mark over her cheek. She didn't cry or shake. She just looked forward like someone walking through fire long after the heat had stopped registering. Behind her, the conductor handed off a yellowing sheet of paper to a man with greasy hair and a brand-new revolver at his hip. Kessler. Tom. Knew him, owned horses, hired hands that didn't last long. Wore his money like a mouthful of gold teeth. That her? Kessler asked, waving the paper in the air like it mattered. Bride contract, signed and paid. Uncle said she's pure. Tom didn't answer. His eyes had gone to the girl. She didn't meet his gaze. She looked at the platform boards beneath her and pressed her lips so tight they turned white. You're taking her back to your place? Tom asked slowly, voice flat as winter mud. Kessler sneered. A deal's a deal, Sheriff. This one's. Bought fair? Paper says so? No deals here, Tom said, stepping forward once. She's not property. Paper don't hold up when it starts with a bottle and ends in bruises. She's mine. No, Tom said, softer now, but firmer. She's not. Kessler's face twisted, but he saw something in Tom's stance, not his gun, but the certainty behind it. There were men you didn't cross in Stillwater. Thom Ellard wasn't loud, but he didn't bluff. With a scoff and a curse, Kessler turned on his heel and stomped away, boots clanging against the metal steps as he hauled himself back onto the train. The conductor didn't argue. Doors closed. With a hiss. The engine moaned and the train pulled away, its smoke trailing like a black ribbon across the morning sky. She still hadn't looked at Tom. You got a name? He asked, voice low, almost apologetic. She hesitated. Then, Isobel. All right, Tom nodded. You can come with me. I've got a place just past the ridge. You don't owe me anything. I didn't ask you to step in, she said quietly. I know. She glanced up then, finally, her eyes sharp as glass and twice as fragile. She was older than she looked, not in years but in things survived. Tom didn't. Press. He turned toward his horse, a patient bay tethered to the rail. After a long moment she followed. The ride was silent. The trail to his cabin curled through pine shadow and shallow snowbanks, their breath fogging in the cold. Tom didn't talk, and she didn't offer. The sun stayed low. Isobel rode side saddle, clinging to the horn with raw fingers, her dress snagging once on a thorny branch they passed. She didn't react. His cabin came into view just as dusk crept over the ridge. It was a modest thing, wood-weathered silver-gray, chimney smoking, shutters fixed tight. A rocking chair rested on the porch, unmoving, dust gathering on its arms like snow too stubborn to melt. He dismounted first, then offered her a hand without looking straight at her. She took it, not out of trust, but out of necessity. Inside, the fire was already lit. The scent of cedar smoke clung to everything. He motioned toward a chair. She didn't sit. She stood near the hearth, palms outstretched toward the heat as if remembering what warmth was. I'll get you something to eat, Tom said, already turning toward the kitchen shelf. Spare rooms down the hall. There's quilts. Ain't fancy. I don't need, she began. You do, he cut in. And it's there, that's all. Pot of beans warmed over the fire. He laid out bread that had gone tough at the edges and a tin of apple preserves. Isobel ate in silence, slow, deliberate, like she was rationing trust in her own body. That night, Tom sat on the porch with a coffee cup gone cold in his hands. Inside, he heard nothing but the creak of the floorboards as she moved, slow and cautious. He didn't check on her, didn't knock. The fire burned low, and the stars came out. He stared at the sky like he was trying to remember something he hadn't thought about in years. Inside, Isobel opened the door to the spare room. On the dresser was a faded photo, a woman with kind eyes, her hair braided tightly, sitting in that same rocking chair. The same shawl now folded on the end of the bed. No dust on it. Isobel stood there a long while. And for the first time in months, she slept behind a door that locked from the inside. Ask ChatGPT. The morning after, the cabin felt colder than it had any right to be, even with the fire still faintly alive in the hearth. Thom stirred it with the iron poker in one hand and cradled a tin mug of weak coffee in the other. The silence between them wasn't sharp, but it was thick, like wool left too long in the rain. Isobel sat at the small kitchen table. Her eyes scanned the room the way a hawk might scan a canyon. She wasn't looking for comfort. She was noting escape routes. Weak wood, sharp things, signs of temper. She found none. There was a Bible on the side table near the rocking chair, cover curled with time, pages soft at the corners. The chair creaked even when it didn't move, as if it remembered weight long gone. On the mantel above the fire hung a small portrait. Yellowing at the edges, a woman, early 30s, hair pinned in loops, wearing a high-collared dress and a half-smile that suggested she'd rather not sit still for such things. Thom caught her looking. He didn't speak. He just added another log to the fire. "Your wife?" she asked finally. He nodded once. 10 years. Isobel didn't ask where she'd gone. The way he looked at that photo said enough. "I can leave today," she murmured, her voice smaller than she intended. "If the storm lifts." Thom's eyes flicked toward the frost-thick window. Flakes fell slow, steady, heavy, like they meant to stay. "You can," he said, "but you don't have to." She looked back down at the mug in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly. She didn't want to admit how warm the room was. Not because of the fire, but because nobody had touched her. Nobody had shouted. Nobody had claimed her like a stray animal bought off a platform. "I don't want to stay where I'm not welcome. You're not a burden." That's not the same as being welcome," he didn't argue. Thom rarely used two words when one would do. Instead, he brought a bundle of firewood inside and stacked it neatly by the hearth. Later, he took a hammer to a loose plank on the porch. His hands, large, weather-beaten, calloused, moved with the rhythm of a man who fixed things quietly. And only once. Isobel watched from the window, unsure why the sound of hammering was steadier than any heartbeat she could remember. That night, the snow piled thick as ash across the roof. The wind howled once, then gave up. Thom lit a lamp in the hallway and gestured to the guest room again. "There's a latch on the inside," he said, "if you want it." She nodded. But she didn't go in just yet. Her feet moved her toward the hearth, where she knelt and reached for the knitting basket tucked beneath the side table. Inside it was a half-started scarf, needles still stuck mid-row. Dust lay in the gaps. It hadn't been touched in years. She didn't ask if it was his wife's. She knew it was. Her fingers moved over the yarn absently, slowly. She wasn't good at it, but she remembered enough. The rhythm was broken, but steadying. She didn't realize Thom was watching from the shadow of the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. He saw her hands, not manicured or soft like the women in town, but worn, knuckles raw, the kind that stitched things together even when they were breaking. The next morning, he found her folding linens in the kitchen, her braid tied back properly. The shawl was over her shoulders, not as armor, but as something nearing comfort. She poured the coffee without asking if he wanted any. He accepted. It just as silently, neither of them mentioned the knitting. Days passed like slow-moving clouds. She cooked sometimes. Other times he did. They never asked permission. The rules became a kind of dance, unspoken, learned by footstep and glance. She would sweep the porch after snowfall. He would leave a split log beside her door before the sun was up. They didn't speak of the past, but it hung there, in the air, in the frost-trimmed window panes, in the scent of pine-wood smoke and old sorrow. One evening, as she buttoned her coat to fetch water from the pump, her sleeve slipped, revealing the bruise again, faded now, but not gone. Thom looked once, then turned back to the stew pot. She hesitated. "Aren't you going to ask what happened?" "No," he said, "not unless you need to tell it." She didn't reply, but something shifted in her shoulders after that. The tightness eased. Not all the way, but enough that when she passed him the bowl later, their fingers touched. For half a second, and neither of them pulled back. Thom fixed a drawer in the spare room that had stuck since spring. He left a tin box on the dresser, buttons, threads, small tools. She opened it like a gift, sewed a new hem on her dress, with one of the needles inside. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Still water whispered behind their backs. The wind came through the chimney some nights, humming like a song with no words. But in the cabin, something had settled. They were not friends, not yet. But they were no longer strangers. And for now, that was enough. Ask ChatGPT. The blizzard came without warning. One moment, the sky was a soft pewter gray. The next, the wind was hurling snow sideways like fistfuls of salt. It didn't scream. It hissed, a long, low breath that never ended. Thom bolted the windows tight. The wood stove pulsed with heat. Outside, the world disappeared. Even the barn was swallowed in white. Inside, there was nowhere to go. They moved around each other like ghosts, passing through narrow halls with quiet nods and soft footfalls. Thom chopped firewood near the hearth and left small bundles beside her door each night. She knew it was him. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him out loud. The act didn't ask for gratitude. On the second day, the shutters began to rattle. Thom secured them with wire and nails. Isobel mended a loose button on his coat while he was outside. When he returned, he paused, seeing it, just for a moment. Then he hung the coat up and made no comment. But he boiled her tea that evening. Though she hadn't asked for any, the house was full of unspoken things. Isobel wandered into the small room where dust had settled thick on the floorboards. It looked unused, but not abandoned. A trunk sat beneath the window, its brass hinges dulled. She opened it with slow hands. Inside lay a folded shawl, deep blue and faintly perfumed with lavender and wood smoke. Beneath it, 2 knitting needles caught mid-row in a half-started scarf, the yarn still soft, untouched by moths. She sat beside the trunk and cried, not for the woman, not for what was lost, but for how gently it had all been kept that night. She braided her hair tightly, not for neatness but for strength. As if binding herself back together, Thom saw her pass through the hallway and pause by the fire. Her braid was tight, clean, sharp down the back like a soldier's blade. She met his eyes for the briefest moment. Something in that look made him stop halfway toward the mantel. He returned to his room, opened the drawer where his revolver sat, and slowly, without quite knowing why, closed it again. The storm raged louder. Rafters groaned. Icicles like teeth formed along the eaves. Thom brought out a tin of biscuits from the cupboard, stale but serviceable. She placed one on a plate for him and ate hers over the sink, crumbs falling like snow onto the chipped enamel. Later she stood near the fire, watching it curl and snap. Her voice came so softly, it startled both of them. What was she like? Thom didn't pretend not to know what she meant. He sat on the rocking chair, the one that always creaked, even still, and rested his hands on his knees. She had a way of making silence feel like a song. He said. Isobel stayed standing, but her arms slowly crossed, not in defensiveness, but to hold herself from spilling. She left her warmth in this house, he added after a pause. Even when she didn't know it. Isobel turned her face slightly, and in the glow of the firelight, a faint smile formed, weak, flickering, but it stayed. Thom looked at her, not like a man studying a woman, but like someone seeing proof that the frost had finally cracked just a little. That night, Isobel left her door slightly open. Not wide, just enough for the hallway light to kiss the edge of the quilt. Thom noticed when he passed by, carrying a log for the fire. He didn't close it. He just nodded to himself and kept walking, The wind howled louder, but it no longer reached them. The next morning, the world was still gone outside. White stretched beyond the windows like an ocean with no end. But inside the cabin, the fire didn't falter. The kettle sang. And for the first time since her arrival, Isobel hummed, just a note or two under her breath, as she stitched a patch onto the elbow of her coat. Thom listened from the other room and didn't interrupt. They didn't call it peace, they didn't name it anything, but the storm had lost its grip on more than the land. The snow softened to slush by morning, and the wind's bite became a whisper. The world outside began to return. Brittle fence posts reappeared from under drifts. The pump thawed, and ravens returned to perch on bare limbs, but the quiet that settled inside Thom's cabin wasn't peace. It was thinner than that, a stretched silence waiting to snap. Isobel took to walking farther past the porch now, clearing snow off the path without being asked. Her hands were chapped and red. But she moved with purpose, not with fear. Thom watched her through the window as he shaved curls of pine for kindling. By the third day after the storm, they rode into town. Stillwater was small, but its rumors ran like wildfire through dry grass. As they stepped into the general store, eyes darted. Mrs. Harlan behind the counter offered a pinched smile too late to be sincere. Two women near the wool rack exchanged a whisper with the subtlety of a slap. Thom said nothing. He simply picked up what he needed, flour, salt, a tin of nails, while Isobel walked slowly through the aisles, feeling the weight of every glance like pebbles in her coat pockets. One man at the counter leaned toward another and said, "Not quietly enough. Didn't know the sheriff was hiring." His friend chuckled. "Guess he found himself a new widow." Thom's eyes met theirs. Not with anger, but with the kind of stare that stripped the humor from the bones of their mouths. The men turned back to their tobacco. Isobel said nothing until they were back on the wagon. "I'm not your burden," she murmured. "I know. They think I am." "They think a lot of things," Thom said, clicking the reins. "Most of them wrong." When they got home, she went straight to the barn to brush the mare. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. The next evening, a knock came that didn't wait for a welcome. Thom opened the door to find Kessler standing wide-legged, a rolled contract in one hand and a smirk in the other. "She's mine by agreement," he said, waving the paper like scripture. "You got no right to keep her." Thom didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he walked to the table, unpinned the star from his chest, and laid it flat between them. "You want to argue with the law," he said. "You can read it first." Kessler glanced at the badge, then at Thom's eyes, steady, weather-worn, unblinking. "You're hiding her," Kessler muttered. "No," Thom replied. "You lost her." "Difference is in the kind of man that makes each one happen." Kessler's mouth twisted. "She ain't worth the fight." "Then walk away." "Easy?" The rancher stood there a breath longer, fists coiled at his sides, before he turned and stormed off into the dark. Thom picked up the badge. He didn't put it back on. Just set it by the oil lamp and watched its edges catch the flicker of flame. Later that night, while the fire burned low and Thom sat whittling a block of cedar without purpose, Isobel wandered the hallway until she reached the door at the far end, a door he never opened. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air was still. A cradle sat near the window, untouched, carved with care but dusted over. A tiny quilt lay folded at its base, never used, never unfolded. Beside it, on the wall, hung a hand-stitched name, Elena. The letters were faded. Threads loose, Isobel didn't cry. She simply sat on the floor beside the cradle, knees pulled up, eyes soft. She didn't want a child. She didn't come here seeking family. But there was something about the way that small space held hope. Old, unspent, and solemn, that made her breath catch. Thom stood in the hallway, listening, not moving. In that moment, neither of them belonged to the town's rumors, nor to Kessler's contract. They belonged to the house. "And to the quiet between them that no one could sign away?" asked ChatGPT. The snow melted slow that year, as if reluctant to leave. By March, rivulets of water carved tiny roads through the dust-packed yard. The trees shed their burden drip by drip, and the sky traded steel for blue. Life didn't return all at once. It crept in, soft and cautious, the same way she had. Isobel no longer hesitated near the doors. She walked the fence-line without glancing behind her. Her coat, mended and remended, flared in the wind as she helped Thom pull warped boards and set new posts. Her hands were strong now. Her cheeks colored not with shame, but with cold and exertion. When she smiled, and she did, sometimes it no longer looked like a flinch. Her braid had loosened weeks ago. Now she wore her hair down, unbound, caught only by a strip of cloth behind her ears. Thom never said a word about it, but his eyes paused when she passed, just a moment longer than before. In the evenings, after supper, he sat near the window with a block of pine in his lap and a knife in hand. He carved without explanation, slow and methodical, whittling by lamplight. The shavings fell to the floor like curled feathers. Isobel would sew nearby, sometimes humming under her breath, old songs with no words, remembered only by tune. One night she asked, "What are you making?" He looked up, shrugged. "Something for someone." She smiled at that. Useful answer. He didn't elaborate. A week later they sat on the porch beneath a sky bleeding orange into purple. The wind stirred pine needles like the hush of a sleeping child. Birds called far off, and the scent of earth, wet, alive. "Ready?" rose from the thawed soil. Thom reached beside him and handed her the wooden box. It was small, the size of a loaf of bread, polished until it glowed. A carved braid encircled the lid, the wood darkened in its grooves. She held it, thumbs tracing the pattern. "It's beautiful." "Open it." Inside lay the shawl, the one she'd worn on that second day when the cold cut through everything but thread and firelight. But it had been changed. A new seam ran along the border, stitched in fine, even hand. Her name was embroidered on the corner. "Isobel, I can't," she whispered, voice caught in her throat. "You should have something," Thom said, quiet as the dusk, "that carries your name and nothing else." She looked at him, not with surprise, but with something gentler, something that didn't need explaining. There was no kiss. No reaching across the space between rocking chairs. But she pulled the shawl around her shoulders and sat back in her seat. Her eyes closed for a moment, and she breathed in, slow and deep, like someone finally home. The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere a coyote called and was answered. And between them, the fire didn't flare, didn't burn. It simply stayed. The news came on the back of a tobacco-stained envelope, delivered by a boy too young to understand the weight he carried. Kessler was dead. A bottle, a knife, a fight in the back room of a saloon 2 towns east, blood on the floor. No one cried. Thom read the letter once, then folded it into fourths and slid it beneath the oil lamp. "He had land," he said after a long silence. "A claim, some stock, a bit of debt too." Isobel didn't look up from the hearth, where she was feeding the last log into the fire. "It's not mine. It could be." She considered. "Not as greed, but as something else. Something called closure. His brother's still alive," Thom added. "The one with the bad knee mean streak, the kind that follows blood." She nodded once. "Then I'll go speak to him." "I'll come," he said, without pause. They didn't ride fast. There was no need. The trail was dry, cracked in places, dust curling up from their horses' hooves like old ghosts. The sun felt heavy on their backs, but the wind was kind. The Kessler ranch was exactly as she remembered it, if only from the outside. Bitter land, fences sagging, barns leaning with exhaustion. A place that had never known softness. His brother met them at the gate. Thick in the shoulders, beard stained with chewing tobacco, he leaned against the fence like it owed him something. "What brings the sheriff and his—" He stopped short, eyeing Isobel with a curl of the lip. "Guest." She dismounted before Thom could move. Her boots touched the earth with purpose. She adjusted her shawl, the one with her name stitched quiet in the corner, and stepped forward. "I'm not here to argue," she said evenly, "just to speak." "You're owed nothing, perhaps," she said, "but he signed papers. Had land. I was sold into that. I didn't consent. But I came anyway. And I lived with what followed. That has worth. You want gold? A deed? Hell, you want the mule too?" "No," she said. I want what's fair. The brother laughed. You think fairness lives out here? No, she said. But I do. He stared at her face. Unreadable. Then, without another word, he spat on the ground, turned, and limped back toward the house. They left without a confrontation, no guns drawn, no threats, just the quiet satisfaction of being heard and not backing down. On the ride home, Thom didn't speak for a long while. When they crested the ridge and the cabin came into view, its roof catching the last gold of daylight, he finally said, You spoke like someone who never lost their name. I almost did, she answered, but someone gave it back to me. That night, after supper, Thom brought out a plank of pine and laid it across 2 sawhorses in the guest room. He began measuring. Isobel watched from the doorway. What? Are you building? He looked up, steady as always. A shelf. For what? For whatever we both decide it should hold. She stepped closer, took the edge of the board in one hand. Her fingers brushed his, neither pulling away. And then, gently, he asked, Should we build this as ours? She didn't answer with words, but she picked up the second pencil and marked a line. Ask ChatGPT.